Welcome to the Relatively Damaged podcast by damaged parents, where unwanted, torn, ruined people come to learn maybe, just maybe, we're all a little bit damaged. Someone once told me it's safe to assume 50% of the people I meet are struggling and feel wounded in some way. I would venture to say it's closer to 100%. Every one of us is either currently struggling or has struggled with something that made us feel less than, like we aren't good enough. We aren't capable. We are relatively damaged, and that's what we're here to talk about. In my ongoing investigation of the damaged self, I want to better understand how others view their own challenges. Maybe it's not so much about the damage. Maybe it's about our perception and how we deal with it. There is a deep commitment to becoming who we are meant to be. How do you do that? How do you find balance after a damaging experience? My hero is the damaged person, the one who faces seemingly insurmountable odds to come out on the other side whole, those who stare directly into the face of adversity with unyielding persistence to discover their purpose. These are the people who inspire me to be more fully me, not in spite of my trials, but because of them. Let's hear from another hero. Today's topic includes sensitive material which may not be appropriate for children. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as advice. The opinions expressed here were strictly those of the person who gave them. Today we're going to talk with Amanda Ferrat. She has many roles in her life: daughter, granddaughter, sister, niece, cousin, and more. We'll talk about how she comes from a Montana ranch family that believes in very strict gender roles, that is also quite racist and ableist. Let's talk. Welcome, Amanda, to Relatively Damaged. We're so glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad, because we're talking about a struggle, and some people aren't excited to talk about that.
Well, my innate magic name is the badass of holding compassionate spaces. So I am somebody that is comfortable sitting in those dark spaces, those dark moments. So I am very happy to talk about struggle, my own as well as others.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. You're right. You know, you kind of have to be a badass to sit in the midst of it. So we'll just be two queens of badass. Can I adopt that name today?
Yes.
Can we be two queens of badass for today's episode? Okay. So tell me about the struggle that impacted you, or one that impacted you the most, or just one that really you can delineate what happened and how you found hope throughout that process. And we're just going to talk about it from the beginning till we get to where you are now.
Okay. Well, it's been, it's something that I can see is a pattern from childhood till, now in adulthood. And that is that I've kind of always been the black sheep in the family. I come from a Montana ranch family and pretty conservative mindset and values. And I was always very outgoing and social, and my mom used to say, like, I don't know whose child you really are, because I am not a social being. Like, where did you come from? And it's funny because I'm actually, I don't know if most people are interested in the zodiac, but I am a Cancer zodiac. Like, that's my sun sign. But I've since done my whole chart, and it makes sense as why I'm such an extroverted Cancer. Whereas my mom is also a Cancer, but she is very much the hermit crab. Like, her chart shows that she is going to retreat into her shell, whereas I'm like
okay, I want to understand this. So most Cancers are introverted, or they just want to be at home?
They're homebodies. So our happy place is our home, and Cancers can be very sensitive and, yes, very introverted, but of course all your other planets and influences in your chart play a part. And I have like Scorpio and Leo and some other very strong, vibrant influences in my chart that play a big part. I'm also a professional speaker, and I don't think there's another member of my immediate family other than my dad. My dad did play music, so he was comfortable getting on stages, but my mom and some of the rest of my family would just be like, no, thank you, until my nephew came along. And it's funny because there's been almost this parallel journey that I've seen pieces of my struggle in my nephew, in that he's not quite the black sheep, right? He's very much, he was in line with his dad's thinking on a lot of things, and my dad, his papa, on a lot of things, but he's a Scorpio, so he's very sensitive and very artistic and creative. And there's been some similar things. And now he's a sophomore in college, and I'm watching it even play out as he enters into young adulthood. So back to this social being creature, right? Like I brought up doing formal rush for the Greek system to my mom because something came in the mail before I went to college. And my mom was like, no, right? Because that's not something that our family does. Do something so social and outgoing as join the Greek system. And so I didn't my freshman year, and I watched a bunch of friends join. And so then I kind of got a feel for what each house was like. And so my sophomore year, I had classes with some girls that were in a particular house, and I got invited to some informal rush activities, and I was all about it. Girls I had known from childhood were there, girls I'd gone to high school with, and it was just a great house. And it was a way to get academic support as well as to have the social aspect. So I joined and then told my family. And my grandparents were paying for college. So I was kind of like, I hope they'll still write the checks kind of thing.
Oh, wow. So you're totally being a rebel.
Right. But I knew it was my truth. It was my path. It was something that I knew I was meant to do. And I'm so grateful. I'm still involved with my sorority as an alumni. And I can't imagine that not being a part of my journey. Well, guess who just did something very similar? My nephew. He's a sophomore. He has friends that are in a house. They invited him to informal rush. He figured he'd get a bid. And so he reached out to me, and we were texting and chatting. And I told him, I said, really think about it. And it was cute because he knows how our family operates. So he asked me, well, what did Papa and Grandma say when you joined? And I said, well, I kind of did like you, buddy. I went through it first and then let the family know. And I just, because you have to live, it's your life. You get to make your decisions for your life. And I said, I know that what their dad thinks matters to you. And I said, Grandma just couldn't picture the social aspect, but she came to events and she was supportive. And I said, your Papa never really said much. I said, but I think he liked coming around the house because, of course, all the girls were very, very fun with the dads. And because it wasn't very often that we would get a dad that was brave enough to come around the sorority house. And so I think he did reach out to his dad before he accepted the bid. And my brother came and partied at the fraternities when I was in college. So I was like, he better not say anything. Because he got so, and he didn't squash my nephew's dreams. And so I'm not the only Greek in the family. And so it's been fun and I've always advocated for my nephew. I've always stood up for him. I've always said, hey, let him be himself. Let's nurture this versus squash it. Because I know what it felt like to have my dreams squashed. I was constantly told that my ideas were ridiculous, or that what I thought or believed.
Even as a young kid.
Yes, very much so. And it led up to, so I come from a ranching family. So my grandpa, he was a land conservationist in some regards, but ranchers have a very different mindset than they would have called me a liberal, even though I don't, consider myself that. But I'm from Montana, and so the wolves were being reintroduced to Yellowstone. Okay. And of course, every single rancher had concerns about wolves being reintroduced to Yellowstone because it's not like Yellowstone has giant fences around it. So the wolves, once they repopulated, would be free to come outside of the park. And how was this going to be regulated? And were their cattle going to be at risk? Whereas I understood it as a future biologist that it was going to have a positive impact on the ecosystem. So I was very pro-wolf and my grandpa was very anti-wolf. And so how do you take a stand as a 16, 17-year-old against a cattle rancher, but to go vegetarian?
Oh, no, you did not.
I did. So as a teenager, awesome. That is how I asserted myself. I went vegetarian, and there were moments where my father, even though I was a full-grown teenager with a driver's license and a job, and he would try to make me sit at the dinner table and finish whatever protein meat we were having for dinner. And the dog and the cat caught on because they'd make sure they were hanging around because they would try to get slipped whatever it was that I didn't want to be eating. So yeah, it was. And so then my dad caught on the animals, so then the animals got in trouble. So then I felt bad, but yeah, so it's been a lifelong battle and now I can look back with humor because I've since, my dad is gone. He's passed away. All my grandparents are gone. And so I can have a reframe of some of these relationships and some of the struggles and trauma that I went through. And I'm thankful for that. And they've shaped who I am. They've put me on this path to be who I am today. They've allowed me to help my nephew out and navigate his path so that he can be who he is. And so that he can hopefully break free of some of the, patriarchal stuff that comes with being in a Montana ranch family that I'm not a big fan of. So it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, so explain that though for the audience, because it seems like you've got this very clear idea of what it means to be in a ranch family in Montana.
Yeah.
And I do not.
So you get up early, you work hard, everybody needs to be a productive member of society. The men go outside and do the hard work, the women stay inside and do the housework, and help outside as needed, right? And I was grandpa's girl. I was the first grandkid on my dad's side. And so I was grandpa's girl. So I was out getting muddy. I had my own pair of, irrigation muck boots. And I loved going out with grandpa. Learned to curse at age 3 because grandpa would curse at the equipment and the cows. And I picked that up quite well and loved to get dirty and go have fun. And then as soon as my brother came along and was old enough, he's 4 years younger, he got to go with grandpa and I got kicked inside with grandma. And that's actually where a lot of the struggle happened, because grandma, I found out as an adult, had a dad who wasn't always very nice and had expectations of what women needed to be. They needed to be thin. They needed to be properly groomed, go to finishing school, you needed to have good penmanship, all these things. And my grandma brought that to me. I couldn't go outside and play. I had to sit and practice my penmanship. And to this day, when people compliment me on my handwriting, I kind of have that momentary cringe of like, I immediately can see myself back at the dining room table while I know everybody else is having fun outside. I'm stuck sitting there. And this is back in the day of cursive still being, how you learn to write. And I remember having a Barbie coloring book, and I think I gave my Barbies some like inventive makeup. It was the 80s, and I was critiqued for that. And she loved horses, so I loved horses. And I remember drawing a horse, and she tore the drawing to bits verbally, like, saying what was wrong with it. And so I got mad and I crumpled it up and tore it up. She took it out of the garbage, put it back together and framed it and hung it on the wall.
Oh, I don't know what to think about that.
Right? And it was there into my adulthood. It was on her wall into my adulthood.
So if you don't mind, I've got two different ideas in that. What happened here on your side, you've just been basically belittled and thinking everything you did wrong. So you tear it up because you believe all she sees is the flaws. And then I'm thinking she's probably thinking, I want her to know how valuable. I don't want this torn up. It's important to me. I'm going to frame it and put it on the wall. Of course, it could have been very different than that, right? It could have been, I'm going to show her and I'm going to frame this torn.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of that.
Oh no.
And again, I'm an adult. I've done my therapies. I am a counselor now and help others heal from their emotional difficulties and trauma. But yeah, it's like one of those things where it's like, and because it was always funny to her to bring it back up. And it's like, okay, this is a running joke. Yeah. I have a hard time believing, but then things, again, the nephew has been, because here comes the next generation. Right. And she was very different with him. Encouraged his drawings. His drawings were always on the fridge. So I remember one time, like, I sat down and doodled something kind of cute too. So that went on the fridge. It was kind of like, okay, so now I'm fridge worthy because it's a cart, like, so, those kind of things. And then she had issues, preoccupations around weight. And I have a chronic illness that we, of course, didn't know at the time. There's still not a lot known about this chronic illness. And one of the things it does is it affects your hormone and endocrine system. So you put on weight, and it affects women. And you put on weight and you don't know why. And then you can't get rid of it very easily. And so I was an active kid. And here I am, kind of a bigger frame anyhow, but then I'm getting bigger and bigger. And so they started taking me to the doctor because they were worried. And I remember, my journey, I think I was like 7 or 8 years old, of having to go in and get that first blood draw done and, and the critique, right? So my grandpa would buy, so Wilcoxon's is a Montana brand ice cream, and it's pretty delicious. And they lived out in the country, so groceries were an hour trip one way. And so they'd stock up, and they had multiple freezers in their home and pantries. And so he would get like these 5-gallon buckets of chocolate ice cream, and he would make himself a milkshake every night. Well, I would pretend I had fallen asleep, and then I would listen for Grandpa to go out in the garage to get the 5-gallon bucket of ice cream. And then I knew it was milkshake time, and I would sneak out and get a little bit of milkshake. But my grandpa also had a thing for zingers. They're kind of like Twinkies, Zingers. Those things, he'd keep those in the freezer. Well, and my grandma baked. She baked like crazy.
So they're not being helpful.
And Montana, in the 80s and 90s was a little bit of a food desert. For produce, we got maybe Red Delicious and Granny Smith apples, oranges, bananas, grapes, like very basic. And then your basic red and green lettuce, right? Like we didn't have access to a plethora of produce and groceries. And so, yeah, it was your carbs and your proteins and, maybe some green, my grandma had a garden. So in the summer, yes, green salad was prevalent and zucchini galore, but yeah, there wasn't. So it's kind of this, again, reframing as an adult, I can look back and see differently, but then it's like, well, all these cards were stacked against me and nobody knew any better. Like it's nobody's fault. But then how awful that you're putting this child in this position of shame and blame. And, again, that intergenerational stuff that you watch, right? Because I learned as an adult that it came from my great grandpa Jack, most likely to my grandma and her sisters. And then I watched my dad, have weird things around eating most of his life. And I'm so amazed, and I'm not fully sure how I did it, but I am fat and happy. Like I live in my body and I'm happy in my body despite all that I've faced and been through. And then that's been a journey. Like it hasn't been easy by any means. And then my nephew, like he was a little bit of a chunky kid, but he grew into it. Like he needed that because he's now, I think 6'2", 6'3", so he needed that because he grew up and into it. Right. Yeah. But that criticism and that critique and that language. And now that I'm an adult whose body is continuing to throw new curves, but you've got to be that productive member of society. It's like, well, that has to look different for me because my body doesn't allow me to do a 9-to-5, 40-hour a week job. They were so excited when I went to grad school. I'm a grad school dropout, partly because, I was trying to go to grad school as everybody was dying and passing away and wasn't taking time to take care of my mental health and my grief. And wasn't coping, just wasn't allowing what I needed to allow to happen. So that all kind of imploded. And now it's like, all right, I'm going to come back into the world in my power, in my way that works for me. And you can either be on board or not. And so the biggest person that there's that struggle with is my brother. I love him to death. He'll always be my baby brother, but we're very different human beings and we have to learn to just kind of navigate and accept that. And then my mom, I'm still teaching her some things. She's got a learning curve for, some stuff around, what I can and can't do and what that means. But she's trying and I appreciate that. But again, that Montana mindset of just like, you get up and you do what you need to do because that's just how things are done. And it's like, that's great. And some days I wake up and my body says no. So nothing I can do about that.
Right. And how do you cope with that I'm assuming I know it wasn't that way always, right? So because it wasn't that way always, when this started happening, when you started having these troubles, did you beat yourself up? Were you angry? Were you sad? Tell us what was going on at that point in time.
Oh, there's definitely grieving, right? That happens because you lose your identity. You lose ability. I know people can't see us, but we're both sitting here with braces on our wrists today, And so there's days where you're like, yeah, my arm is just non-functional. There's days where something else goes on, and having to learn to accept that, right, is my own grief journey. And then other people have to adopt a new idea of you and rewrite the story of you in their life. And so I think for my family, they were all very excited that I was going to go back to grad school and I was going to become a social worker and I was going to do all these great things with my master's degree. And then I was like, no, I'm not. Like the 4 people that I was going back to school for are gone. They're dead and gone. I don't want to work for anybody else. I don't want to be in the bureaucratic red tape system that comes in the world of social work, because then I don't get to do things the way I want to do things and truly help people because there's all these rules and I know why they're there, but I don't always agree with them, right? I've done that. I've done my world of work in other people's agencies and it just was time to do something different. And really what I needed to do was take time to accept what was going on with my body. And part of that journey was I got myself a puppy for my 40th birthday and I was going to train him to be my service dog. And that was a big part of the journey, right? Like especially with my family, dogs are livestock or a pet. They aren't a disability aid.
I wouldn't have thought of that. I really would not have.
So having to like have my brother understand, like, no, my dog doesn't stay outside with your dogs. He comes in the house when I come in to visit you. Like there's certain rule, and so getting people to understand that. And since then, my dog Ludo, unfortunately, he joined the disabled club too. Turns out he has bad kneecaps. And so ethically, I had to retire him because his kneecaps just randomly pop out of place. And so I ethically couldn't work him.
Yeah.
So now he's been demoted to an emotional support animal, and he still does a wonderful job with that. And, he still goes almost everywhere with me. He just can't go in places, anymore. But that was a journey of educating friends and family and other people as to, I'm not the able-bodied person. And he wasn't just a physical service dog. He was going to be a psychiatric service dog as well, because I had accept my mental health journey. And that's another piece of my struggle, is that I had probably had mental health stuff my whole life, but in my family, we don't always talk about it. Mm-hmm. And that's been a big intergenerational journey as well, because my uncle died by suicide as a teenager.
When you were a teenager, when
he was a teenager? So it was before I was born, but growing up, his pictures were still around the house. And his name was Randy. And my name as a child, my nickname was Mandy. And my grandma would mix our names up from time to time. And so, of course, kids are curious, right? Like, so who is this person in these pictures? Who is this Randy? And only so much would be said, right? And I do remember my dad sitting us down at one point and saying, suicide is never the answer. It's never the final. There's always another option. It's never the final option. And then that was kind of that. And again, as an adult, you learn more things. And in my education and experience working in the mental health field, I was able to kind of unpack some things on my own, and then realize that there had probably been mental health for the last who knows how many generations. And it just comes out, and is portrayed in different ways. And so part of my journey is breaking the stigma around that. It's like, no. And that's why I'm on podcasts and why I'm doing the things I'm doing, is because I'm ready to stand up and say, like, hey, mental illness can run in families. It's going to look different for each member of the family that presents with a diagnosis. And it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to destigmatize it. We need to have these conversations, because it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have these struggles. And the more we talk about it, the more we're comfortable with it, and the more people can like stand up and say, you know what, I resonate with this, and maybe I need to go see my doctor or see a therapist, or not feel so alone. Representation matters.
Right. At least investigate what those feelings mean. Right. I think one of the neatest things that I've learned is that anger actually tells me something important.
Yes.
It's not bad.
No.
And I don't necessarily like it. So I've decided I have unfun feelings and I have fun feelings. So I'm not delineating good and bad anymore, because
I love that.
Right? Because now I know because the fun ones tell me stuff too. It's just, I like what they have to tell me, and more often. But now I'm realizing, like, anger, maybe I'm angry because I'm needing more connection. Maybe I'm angry because I'm feeling like not seen today.
Yes.
And when I can figure that out, then I can go and ask the question, or say, hey, I'm needing this. And when this happens, I certainly don't feel that way. And can we come up with a different plan? But there were two things I really wanted to hear more about. And that was, first of all, definitely the intergenerational. What happens as behaviors get passed down the line? Because it sounds like you have a good amount of knowledge in that area. And then the other thing was family and friends. So when someone becomes disabled, what you recognized in your life with beyond family and friends, and if you lost connection to some of those people. So both of those things would be great.
Yeah. So for the intergenerational, I don't know a ton about it. I'm still learning, but there's studies done even on like how it can affect our genomes and literally be handed down in our DNA, like trauma. My great grandpa came over from Italy at age 14. And his name is on Ellis Island. At 14, your frontal lobe isn't fully developed. You're still a teenager. It was the late 1800s, like that. And, I don't know how many days you're on a ship, right? And like back then there was diseases and people being, getting sick and all these things happening. And It's just like at 14, alone, coming across the ocean, then coming to a country where Italians were not always favored for, they had to struggle. So mining and railroad were kind of the jobs that were happening. So my great grandpa ended up out in Mullen, Idaho. And so just this, I think that made an imprint on him that he handed down to my grandpa. And some of that got handed down to my dad, then to my brother and I. And especially like when you see a pattern of behavior in a person that then shows up in the next generation, it's hard not to believe that some of that is genetic, right? As well as learned and observed. And that's where I've worked really hard to try to change some of that with my nephew, because racism was one of those things that, again, I think was somewhat shaped from my great grandpa's journey. And then my grandpa had his own influences by being in the Army and having to deal with the things he went through in the Army. And, then my dad had his own experiences. And then again, I am a black sheep and an anomaly because I don't know what happened here, but like, I just knew that some of those things weren't okay.
So some of those behaviors that
they never sat well with me. Yeah.
Were wrong. They just, not that they were wrong, but they weren't helpful.
Because when I saw, those jokes and those conversations and those words and that language and like some of the abusive language and things like that happened too, like I was very much able to be like, this isn't okay.
Right.
And when I'm able, I want something different for myself. My life isn't going to have this in it to my best ability. And so I've worked really hard on that. And so that's a piece that I am still learning about, is the epigenetics of how that kind of gets imprinted and handed down. But there's definitely science out there. I know they're doing a lot of studies around with Black folks and that have slavery ancestry, like how the post-traumatic slave disorder and that being in the epigenetics and being literally handed down. So even if you are multiple generations removed from your family that lived as slaves, you're going to still have some of that trauma literally in your DNA.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said something about that, because that literally never crossed my mind. I realized I had implicit biases, right? So for the audience that doesn't know what that means, that's a bias I don't even realize I have, because it's throughout society. So again, one more thing now, that's amazing. I hadn't thought of how that would be passed down, and maybe even probably some of that learned helplessness too, right? We don't have a voice, so the only way we can have a voice is to yell and scream, maybe.
Yep.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, then the other piece you wanted to know more about was how do friends and family cope, and what do they need to know as you are unpacking, right? Learning how to live differently with a disability. I'm still coming to terms with using the identity and label of disabled because I don't have definitive diagnoses yet. I just know that my body doesn't allow me to do what it used to do. I used to be able to go on 3-mile walks every other day and go on hikes, and I would do 5Ks, walking them. If you see me running, you better run faster because something bad's coming. I've never been a runner, but I used to walk and hike and do things, and I can't now. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, my body was in a state and my pain was bad enough. I barely made it to my mailbox and back, so the biggest struggle with friends and family is just, in college, I went out dancing 5 nights a week. So for those friends that have known me from then, it's really hard for them to fathom that I'm in such a different place, that I can't be that girl that would go out dancing 3 to 4 hours a night, 5 nights a week. And now I'm lucky if I can get up and dance to a song.
So in some ways, do you think that your disability becomes a struggle for them to figure out?
I think so. And I'm really lucky. I have beautiful, amazing friends that aren't afraid to ask questions because they know that I'll answer them honestly and with kindness and compassion. And I think the hardest thing has been with my mom, because my mom has seen me have episodes and she's seen me have flare-ups, and then she still just doesn't get it. And I'm trying to have a lot more grace with her. But my friends have been great because they're very trainable and they want to be trainable and they want to do better. And I'm also not afraid to advocate for myself. And I think that's the biggest piece of the struggle, is learning how to advocate for yourself in a way that gets heard and gets received and then gets honored and respected.
So what's the best way to do that?
Coming from a place of compassion and education, because people can't read your mind. They can't know what they don't know. and they may forget, like my mom. And so having some grace and some compassion and just reminding them. I'm also a fat woman. So back pre-COVID, when we could go out and eat out and do things out, I would just remind friends that like, I need certain seating, right? Like there's not going to be certain seats that are going to work for me. Like if it's a skinny, tiny little booth, I'm not going to be able to squeeze myself into that. Or if it's chairs with arms, I may or may not literally fit, right? Or there's certain things like I don't like to have my back to certain things because of some of the mental health stuff, right? And so just really learning how to be like, hey, can we actually sit somewhere else? This isn't going to work for me. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to give them a full explanation, just saying this isn't going to work for me, or this is what I need. And leaving, you know, if they want to ask questions and you feel like you can educate them, great. But knowing how much emotional labor you're willing to do as well is really important.
Well, was it really hard to get to that point, though? So you were capable for a good period of time in your life before you were not as capable.
Right.
And was it hard to find that voice to say, I need this, like when you started realizing you were having issues? Or did you also struggle with, I mean, that's something I struggle with. I think that's why I'm asking is It was hard for me to say, no, I need this. And I kind of felt like a burden. And I'm wondering if you went through that too.
To some degree, very much so, right? Like I just like suck it up and be in pain, or, you know, sometimes bow out of things, right? Or just come up with excuses. And that doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't educate them. It doesn't serve me. There's no benefit to me being in pain for 2 hours and then out of commission the next 2 days. So there was a learning curve there for me, for sure, right? Because our egos get involved and we have to work with our egos to kind of grieve that loss of self and then say, and now, right? That both and that dual reality of, yes, once upon a time you were fully abled and now this is your reality. And it's okay to say, this isn't going to work for me. Sorry. Like I used to love to go. We have this wonderful McMenamin's venue here for concerts. It's this big, huge lawn. So you sit on the lawn. I can't go to those concerts anymore, whether COVID was here or not, right? Like I can't sit on the ground. And so I have learned to, and it's been very uncomfortable and it is very vulnerable. It is a very vulnerable space I've reached out to people having events and said, hey, is your seating not only fat accessible, but disabled, like accessible? Like how accessible is your space for disability and for fatness and for this and this? And there's some people that know how to respond and can say, I have this, this, and this in place, or can say, tell me more about what you need. And then there's people that just don't get it. And that's been really hard to have some of those conversations. Mm-hmm. But I've always been, again, I went vegetarian at 16 to prove a point with my family. Like I've always been one of those that I've had my moments, right, where people have definitely beat me down enough to kind of make me play small and quiet my voice. But I have tattooed on my inner arm, on my left or right arm, find your voice, speak your truth. Because I have worked very hard to be someone that is outspoken for myself, for others, and just in standing up for what I believe in. And so this is an area I've had to learn to kind of speak up for myself. So now I have no problem letting people know if their space isn't accessible, right? Or, you know, how they can do better. And I try to call people in versus call out. I try to be as respectful as possible, but I'm also very straightforward. And I've been told by lots of people, that's what they love about me, is that I'm not going to BS people. I'm not going to lie to them. I'm going to give them a straight shooter answer. And I'm going to do it with the most kindness that I can. Because again, I want people to learn and know how to do better, because only then can they be better. And then we have a better society that is truly accessible for all. And that's my end goal, right? Is harm reduction and a world that is accessible for all.
Yeah, because I don't think running around yelling and screaming justice, justice, justice is going to help. People will put on their boxing gloves and dig in their heels, you know?
And again, as a fat woman, so sometimes the more identity boxes we check, the harder it is for the world to hear us. Because if we think about who gets heard the most, it's white, cisgender, heterosexual men with power and privilege, right? They are at the top of the power and privilege pyramid. And so the more identities you check, whether it's female, whether it's a person of color, Black, LGBTQIA, fat, like the more of those boxes you check, the harder it is to be heard sometimes. And so it is a skill to learn how to advocate and be a voice and have a voice in a way that the top of that pyramid can hear us, and then start to actually make the world accessible.
Okay, so you've got, let's say we've got someone disabled listening to the podcast today, and they're struggling because they're not getting what they need. What do you tell them?
I don't know how many agencies there are out there, but there's more and more of us out there. I'll go back to the representation matters, right? So find somewhere where you can find representation, whether that's people that share your identities or work to be an ally. And if you can't be your own voice, find that space that exists to be a voice with you and for you until you can use your own voice. And there are more and more ally and accomplice and advocate spaces showing up. As much as I dislike technology and social media and all these things, social media is a place where we are finding more and more groups pop up where you can find those people like you that have those same identities or shared identities, and know that asking for what you need is a totally acceptable and okay thing to do as a human being on this planet. That there is no one on this earth that does not deserve to ask for what they need. That we as human beings are totally worthy of dignity and respect, just as we are.
Right. And so just to kind of reiterate, to make sure I understand what you're saying, because I think what came up for me when I was listening to you is surround yourself with safe people, whether that's a support group or getting involved in advocacy or anything like that. And as you gain that strength, start using your voice. You don't have to use your voice before you're ready.
Right.
Just find that support and get in with the safe people, because that's where you're going to find strength.
If you're brave enough and you can't find something that works, create your own community. That's another beauty of Facebook, right? I just launched my own group, and it's not that I wasn't finding spaces where I fit in, but I wanted a space where I could be 100% of myself 100% of the time, where I could let all of my identities, all of my passions, all of my skills, all of my expertise shine, and bring in other women to help them learn how to let 100% of themselves shine 100% of the time. And, because that's all, I want us all to leave this planet like the most optimum beings that we ever could have been, making the biggest ripples that we've ever could have made, and just living a good life, right? Because we don't know what day is our last. My dad was gone at 62. So and I have friends that passed in their 30s. I know teenagers that have passed, we just never know when our, number is going to get called, so to speak. And so, if you're brave enough, start your own group, your own community. And, going back to the representation piece, growing up as a kid, I was born in 78, so grew up through the 80s. The first representation I had of like a loud, bossy, kind of outspoken, bigger woman, so to speak, was Miss Piggy.
Oh, yeah, she was fantastic. I love her character.
And I grew up on everything Jim Henson. Like, my childhood is totally shaped by Jim Henson. Rest in peace. I miss him dearly. But my favorite movie is The Labyrinth, and second is, Dark Crystal is up there as well, and Sesame Street and Fraggle Rock and all of that. Like, I grew up on all of that, and the Muppets, all things the Muppets. But yeah, Miss Piggy was one of the first like positive representations of like outspoken, quote unquote, fat female, right? Because the hecklers would tease her and whatever, and she was a pig. What is the assumption of pigs? Pigs are fat, Yeah. So, but she was this positive, powerful, like outspoken, female character that, gosh darn it, Kermit was going to love her, and she was going to be fabulous, and she didn't care what anybody else thought. And I guess that's my other, is just hold on to that Miss Piggy energy, or find your own Miss Piggy, right? Like, who is that representation for you that you can then, and the more we have, because social media can do so much damage, right? Like, if we are following all these people that just don't feed our souls, it can turn us into those take us to those dark spaces and turn us into these self-loathing globs of human goo. And I think the key that I have found is just finding those badass representation of who I want to be and what I want to embody. And the more I can bring that into my life, I know I have a lot more better days if I've got that in my feed on social media than a bunch of people that don't align with those values. And that's why my name of my business is Value Yourself Counseling, is because I am a values-based person. So you got to know what your inner values are and then make sure you are representing that everywhere you can.
So live by your values.
Yes.
So your identity, maybe your identity isn't so much in what you do, how you look, but in what you value and what you stand for on an internal level, and not all this other external stuff.
Right. And that's where all my struggles have lied in my life. My struggles have been the hardest when I have not been in alignment with my values, when I have been forced or coerced or made to believe that I needed to live for someone else's purpose, for someone else's values, and not in alignment with my own.
So how do you stay in alignment with your own, though? If you're like, let's say you're transitioning from living for those other people instead of for yourself, do you remember what that process was like and how you got through that?
The first thing is to do a values audit. To literally, there are lists you can find on the internet that list all the different values, and sitting down. And the first step is to like circle 20, right? That kind of resonate with you. And then narrow it down to 10, and then narrow it down to like 3 to 5 that are just your core pillar values, making sure that those definitions of what they are, right? And maybe from that 20, you realize that of those 5 that you pick, 5 or 6 of those other values can fall under that one. So that one becomes the core because you can see how other ones kind of fall underneath that value in your embodiment of that value. And then once you know what those are, and you I suggest putting them up on a sticky note or whatever on your wall so that they're there as a visual reminder. And then, or get artwork. I know people can't see me, but like compassion is one of my core values. And I found this beautiful card that had artwork on it that says compassion, and it's framed behind me. So whatever you can do to kind of have those where you can visually have those as a reminder, I think it helps. And then do those value audits from time to time. If something ever feels out of alignment, check back in. If relationships feel out of alignment, ask yourself, does this person's core values match with my core values? Do their core values align with mine? And if they don't, then that's where that discord in that relationship is most likely coming from. And then you can say, these are my core values. So these are my needs. This is what I need in my life to align with these core values. So that can say, these are the behaviors I need from other people or the expectations I have, right? And know that people can't meet your expectations if you don't set those boundaries, if you don't let it be known what those expectations are. So that's another way that values inform us, is values allow us to know what our boundaries need to be and how we can set those.
Yeah. And it sounds like what you're saying, I heard you say, go back to the values assessment as needed, or maybe just even periodically. So in that statement, what I'm thinking you're telling us is that your values might change, and that's okay.
Yeah, I had to reevaluate mine after coming to terms, as part of coming to terms with my grief and my grief journey, in coming to terms with owning that even though I don't have a diagnosis, if I read the ADA definition of disability, I am disabled. And so having to go back to those values and just be like, okay, what ones still fit? Where am I needing to shift? Because, you grow. Yeah. We grow and change as people. Our lived experiences shape us. Our education shapes us. Our perspectives change. There's all sorts of cartoons and memes out there, right? With caterpillars and butterflies, right? Where the caterpillar is sitting there with the butterfly, and the caterpillar doesn't understand how the butterfly, why the butterfly wants to be a butterfly or how the butterfly got to be a butterfly. We are all meant to metamorphose and change and grow. And in that change and growth, it's uncomfortable, right? All that happens in discomfort. But my compass to help me get through has always been going back to those values and kind of figuring out, is there something out of alignment? What can I step back into? What is calling to me right now in my life? What do I need in my relationships? And then there's another piece that I learned about actually just this year, and that's our core desired feelings. So then we can go into the same thing, right? Like we can have this feelings list, go in and kind of pick our top 20 and then narrow it down again until we get to our kind of top 3. Like, what are our core desired feelings? And, like we can use those to help navigate, like, this is how I want to feel in my life. And if something coming into my life is not aligning, like it's not making me feel this way, it's making me feel the opposite, let's navigate and know kind of what we need to eliminate or what we need more of. So like one of my words, I can't just do 3. So I made mine all like 2-word things. I changed one of the feelings into like an adjective. So one of mine is like curiously compassionate, because I want to have curiosity around situations that like cause me to prickle up and have compassion for whatever's. But another one is spiritually aligned. I realized that I kind of navigated 2020 like, however, and wasn't really embracing my spirituality and wasn't putting protected time on the calendar around certain things that I needed to honor that. And I am doing that differently this year, and it already feels so much better. So again, checking in with those values. Once you kind of feel good playing around with your values and you know what those are, then the next step, I think, would be those core desired feelings. A gap there, or a bridge to the gap, or before you do any of this work, is just having that awareness. So I love what you said earlier about you don't label your emotions as good or bad. You instead say fun or unfun, but you recognize that they all have a job to do, that they all have a message to send. And that's the core of my work as well, that I do with people as an emotional wellness counselor, is just having that awareness of what your emotions are and what they're there to tell you, because they are not good or bad. They are not positive or negative. They all have a job to do. So if we're feeling joy, well, what are we joyous about? How can we celebrate it and hold on to that joy and remember that joy later when we're in moments of despair and maybe need some of that joy to borrow again to help us get out of that, right? Yep. And then in those moments of despair, what need isn't being met? What is missing there? And how can we fill that, right? So all of our emotions serve a purpose. They all have something to tell us and to help us learn and grow, keep us safe, whatever it is. And so I love that you recognize that and brought that up, because I think that's the first piece, is just that, all right, I am feeling grief. What is my grief here to tell me? Is it telling me that I miss this person because I love them so much and I've got this thing in my life right now that I really wish that I could share with them? How can I still share it with them? How can I honor this piece of me that's missing this grief right now in this moment, right? So, or yeah, I'm really mad. Why am I mad? Like, oh, I'm mad because I was disappointed. Somebody let me down. Well, now I can reach out to them and say, hey, I felt disappointed when you did this, and here's what I need next time, right? And so we can kind of, again, begin to advocate for ourselves and kind of set those boundaries and just begin to navigate our lives in a way that is aligned. We're getting our needs met. We're having a voice, and that voice is being heard because we are using it in a way that allows it to be heard.
Yeah, because like we were talking about earlier, yelling and screaming, I don't hear people when they're yelling and screaming at me. So if I'm going at somebody telling them they're sick, bad, and wrong, if you will, they're just not going to hear me. And it's actually, I think for me, been more helpful to go in with empathy and understanding from that perspective. I take it, sometimes that can be my only job, and I will feel attacked. Oh my gosh, I will feel attacked, and I just bite back I just be quiet, and I just try to ask more questions so I can understand, so that I can get to the next step. And that is hard. Yeah. So for our listeners, it sounds great. It is really hard in practice. So 3 things, I mean, you've given us a ton of things, but what would be your top 3 that you would like to give to someone who's maybe just now figuring out that they don't have the same body they used to? They're different, they're slower, they hurt more maybe. It could be anything. So what are the 3 tools you would like to give them, or make sure that they walk away from this podcast with?
Learn how to ask for what you need, first and foremost, and know that it's okay to ask for what you need. So that would be the first one. Second, learn how to protect your time, energy, and space. So in the chronic illness world, we talk about spoons, right? My fellow spoonies will know what I'm talking about. So we wake up every day with only so many spoons to spend, right? And we get to decide how much energy we spend. Well, there's the addition of that, which are the forks. So the forks are the expectations from the outside world that get stuck in us that we don't have any control over. But when we set boundaries and when we kind of know how to navigate and set up our calendars and protect our time, we can balance those spoons and forks a lot better. And then we can have those moments of, hey, whoa, not enough spoons, too many forks, I'm done. So learn how to balance and protect your energy. I think that's just the basis of good self-care is, being able to look at, this is a week where I've got a lot going on Monday to Friday. So Saturday and Sunday, the calendar needs to be absolutely clear because I'm going to need to really take some self-care time. Or, you know what, I'm having to get up early on this morning. So I know I'm going to need to go to, just really kind of learning your body's rhythms. Mm-hmm. I'm a big advocate of knowing your chronotype. And there's 4 chronotypes and it's based on your circadian rhythm. I'm a wolf chronotype. I don't do things before 10 a.m. I am not meant to do things before 10 a.m. I am not functional before 10 a.m. Right. And even at 10 a.m., it's a little questionable. So, get to know yourself, really get to know yourself and then honor yourself the best you can. And then thirdly, it's okay if you're not okay and know you're not alone. So find that representation, find that community, find those safer spaces, find those advocates and allies. And if you can't, or if it's hard, learn to be your own and know it's a journey and have grace and kindness and compassion with yourself.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Those are some great things that our listeners, there's great gems of wisdom from you today.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Relatively Damaged by Damaged Parents. We really enjoyed talking to Amanda about how she learned to stand up for herself and be straightforward. We especially liked when she told us she decided to go vegetarian in a ranch family. To unite with other damaged people, connect with us on Instagram. Look for Damaged Parents. We'll be here next week, still relatively damaged. See you then.